The Pacific burns like a slow, relentless fever. From the Philippines to the Solomons, the tide of Japanese expansion swallows island after island. American garrisons fall in isolation, their last radio signals thin with static and despair. Each coded message that fails to reach its destination means another convoy ambushed, another battalion erased. In darkened naval rooms from Pearl Harbor to San Diego, the war has turned invisible, a war of signals, frequencies, and languages. Japanese cryptographers, trained in mathematics and linguistics, dismantle American codes with surgical precision. Systems once considered unbreakable now crumble in weeks. Orders are intercepted, battle plans rewritten before they unfold. To fight an empire that listens, America must find a way to speak without being heard. Commanders plead for innovation. Cryptographers experiment with ciphers and machines, but every new pattern is eventually deciphered. The enemy's intelligence seems to anticipate every move. In this war of words, mathematics has reached its limit. What remains to be tried is something beyond logic, something human. Among those listening to the desperation is a civilian officer named Philip Johnston. The son of a missionary, he grew up among the Navajo people of the American Southwest. He knows a language that is unlike any other, one without an alphabet, one that changes meaning with tone, rhythm, and breath. To outsiders, it sounds like poetry, yet even its speakers call it sacred, not to be written down. To Johnston, the idea seems absurd and inevitable at once. What if the United States could turn this ancient, unwritten tongue into a living code? A code no enemy could read, because it was never designed to be read at all. As the Pacific widens into uncertainty, the search for an unbreakable voice begins. Somewhere in the deserts of Arizona, an idea older than the war itself is waiting, silent, intact, and untouched by machines. For now, the generals can only hope that salvation might come not from a cipher, but from a people forgotten by history. And in that silence between defeat and discovery, a whisper begins, one that no empire will ever understand. To most Americans in 1942, the Navajo language was a curiosity, a remnant of a culture pushed to the edges of the nation. Yet to those who spoke it, it was more than speech. It was breath, geography, and memory woven together. Its grammar defied Western logic. There was no alphabet, no formal script, and no written guide to pronunciation. Each word lived within the rhythm of the speaker's voice, shaped by tones and pauses invisible to paper. Linguists who had studied it described the Navajo tongue as nearly impossible to learn for those born outside it. The United States Bureau of Indian Affairs estimated that fewer than 30 non-Navajo people on Earth could understand it with any fluency, and even among them, few could translate it swiftly in real time. Its syntax bent around perception rather than structure. Its verbs changed form depending on the shape and motion of what they described. A falling leaf and a falling stone used entirely different verbs because their spirits moved differently through the world. This was not merely communication, it was philosophy made audible. And it held within it a secret power that modern warfare had overlooked: absolute obscurity. When Philip Johnston proposed using this language as the foundation for a battlefield code, officers at Camp Elliott in California agreed to a small-scale test. On an overcast morning in February 1942, a handful of Navajo Marines-to-be sat before field radios, their voices calm, steady, and quick. A group of Marine cryptographers prepared on the other end, listening to a message transmitted in Navajo. Within 20 seconds, the words had crossed the wire. Moments later, a fluent Navajo speaker translated them perfectly back into English. The observers were stunned. The same message, if encoded, using the existing mechanical ciphers, would have required 30 minutes to encrypt, send, and decrypt. Here it took less than one. To test its security, the Marine Corps handed recordings of the Navajo transmissions to their most skilled linguists and Japanese language specialists. Hours passed, then days. Not a single word could be identified. Even the phonetics offered no familiar pattern, no resemblance to Asian, European, or Polynesian structures. To trained ears, it was simply unrecognizable sound. It was at that moment that skepticism turned into belief. The commanding officers realized they were witnessing something extraordinary, a living code that no machine could predict and no enemy could reduce to logic. The very qualities that had once made the Navajo language marginalized, its complexity, its secrecy, its refusal to conform, now made it invaluable. For centuries, governments had tried to erase such languages, branding them obstacles to progress. Now, the U.S. Marine Corps saw what others had missed, that heritage itself could become a weapon. In the days that followed, plans were drawn up to recruit Navajo speakers, to build an entire code system rooted in this ancient tongue. It would begin as an experiment. 29 volunteers, a few radios, and a faith that words older than any empire might still shape the future of war. What began as an idea whispered by one man would soon move from test benches and training camps to the beaches of the Pacific. The empire that had mastered the art of decoding would soon face a voice it could neither name nor understand. And as the Marines prepared their first recruits, the world's most unconventional weapon was being born, not in steel or circuitry, but in silence. May 1942. The Pacific War has reached its hungriest phase. America needs new soldiers, new weapons, and new ideas. Among the thousands who answer the call, 29 young Navajo men step forward, not from cities or universities, but from the red canyons, mesas, and wind-beaten plateaus of the American Southwest. They come from places with names that echo like prayers: Chinle, Shiprock, Tuba City. Some have never seen the ocean they are about to fight for. Their world has been one of sheep herding, dry fields, and wind-carved stone, yet within them lies something far rarer than steel, a language untouched by outsiders, layered in rhythm and memory. When the Marine recruiter swears them in, even he does not know what they have been chosen to do. Their orders are sealed. Their families receive only fragments of information. Their sons are joining a special communications unit. Mothers wave goodbye without knowing that their sons' voices will soon carry entire battles across the Pacific. In silence, they leave the reservation, men of faith, duty, and an ancient tongue now sworn to secrecy. At Camp Pendleton, and later at Camp Elliott, the 29 are placed in a guarded room with blackboards, notebooks, and radio sets. Their task sounds impossible: to build a code within their own language, one fast enough for combat and secure enough for war. It must be remembered entirely from memory. Nothing may be written down. Failure would expose both the code and the culture it comes from. They begin by translating the modern world into the language of nature. The word for hummingbird becomes fighter plane for its speed and darting wings. Whale stands for battleship, turtle for tank, ironfish for submarine. Each translation is chosen with precision and respect, war reshaped through the lens of their homeland. Concepts like battalion, grenade, and machine gun are recast in imagery drawn from the earth. In 2 weeks, the code grows to 200 terms. What emerges is not a cipher, but a living system. Fluid, intuitive, and utterly unique. Every code talker learns it by heart. To an untrained ear, it is simply conversation. To the trained, It is coordination, artillery correction, and the language of war disguised as kinship. The men test it through endless drills, sending and receiving mock messages under pressure. What once took half an hour to encrypt is now transmitted in seconds. Their voices move with calm precision, syllables blending into a song only they understand. Officers watching from the sidelines begin to realize the magnitude of what has been created, a code not built by machines, but by memory and meaning. In the evenings, when the training grounds fall quiet, the 29 sit together beneath the California stars, a long way from home, yet connected by something deeper than uniform or rank. They have taken their ancestors' language, once punished in schools, and turned it into a weapon of survival. In doing so, they have transformed silence into strength. When the first phase of training ends, the system is locked away in classified vaults, marked top secret. Only a handful of officers are allowed to know it exists. The code will next be tested not in classrooms or camps, but under fire, in the jungles of the Pacific, where one wrong word could mean death. What began as an idea now has a heartbeat, but the real question remains: will it survive its baptism of war? August 1942. The island of Guadalcanal, green, humid, and haunted by rain, becomes the first true test of the new code. For weeks, American Marines have fought to hold their fragile beachhead against waves of Japanese counterattacks. Supplies run short, tempers grow thin, and every radio transmission risks interception. The Japanese have already broken several American codes. Now, every order is a gamble between survival and exposure. Into this chaos arrive the first Navajo code talkers. They are quiet, disciplined, and unremarkable in appearance. Young men among thousands. Few outside the command staff know their purpose. Their radios, marked only with standard Marine stencils, give no hint that they carry something the enemy has never heard before. When the Japanese attack again at dawn, the code talkers are ordered to transmit their first live message under fire. The sound of artillery merges with the crackle of static. Over the radio waves, words that no one in Tokyo could recognize begin to flow, steady, fast, unbroken. Within seconds, the message reaches the command post. Coordinates for counter-battery fire are relayed, verified, and executed. Shells thunder across the jungle, landing precisely on the enemy's guns. What once took half an hour through standard encryption now takes less than a minute. The difference is measured in lives. Reinforcements arrive on time. Ammunition is delivered to the right ridge. Men who might have died in confusion now hold their ground. Commanders watching the exchange call it instant intelligence. The Japanese intercept the transmissions, of course. They intercept everything. But their linguists hear only syllables that seem to vanish into one another, forming no pattern, no repetition, no sense. To their analysts, it sounds like nothing they have ever studied. Not Chinese, not Korean, not Polynesian. The intercepts are logged, analyzed, and discarded. The Empire has no framework to understand what it is hearing. Within the Marine ranks, skepticism lingers. Some officers believe the Navajo system is too improvised, too strange, too fragile to survive the battlefield. Others suspect it's simply coincidence that messages are moving faster, but disbelief erodes quickly under fire. In foxholes and radio tents, Marines begin to witness what the new system can do. When a Japanese mortar position opens up near the Matanikau River, a single code talker relays its location in under 20 seconds. Minutes later, American artillery silences it. Men nearby see the Navajo operator calmly remove his headset, dust from the explosion still drifting over the trench. "How did you do that so fast?" a sergeant asks. The reply is simple: we just talk. Through nights of tropical rain, the pattern repeats. The code talkers transmit hundreds of messages without error, guiding aircraft, coordinating naval bombardments, directing units through terrain so thick that even compasses falter. Each message, a thread of language binding chaos into coherence. Slowly, respect replaces doubt. The voices that once sounded foreign become the heartbeat of communication. The Marines learn to trust the rhythm, short bursts, quiet pauses, flawless timing. The Navajo operators' calm under pressure becomes legend. They speak as if the war outside their radios does not exist, their tone unwavering even as shells fall around them. By the campaign's end, reports circulate among commanders. The new code has been tested in combat and proven unbreakable. The Marine Corps begins requesting more Navajo speakers immediately. The experiment has become doctrine. But beneath the victories, one truth remains. No one outside their small circle knows who these men are or what language they use. Their contribution is classified, their names unspoken. They fight two wars at once, one against Japan, another against the silence imposed by secrecy. And as the smoke of Guadalcanal settles over the Pacific, the generals prepare to expand the code, unaware that the Empire is already listening and failing to understand a single word. By 1943, the code has grown, expanded by blood and necessity. Every new island, every new campaign demands more words, more precision. From 200 terms to nearly 600, each is memorized by heart. There are no notebooks, no printed manuals. The entire language of war now lives in the minds of men who were once forbidden to speak their own tongue. Their classroom is the battlefield. Each syllable they speak must survive gunfire, exhaustion, and fear. The Navajo talkers train relentlessly, repeating lists of words until they fuse into instinct. Iron fish for submarine, turtle for tank, buzzard for bomber. Every metaphor chosen with care, the logic of nature reshaped into the logic of modern war. What had once described the rhythm of wind and desert now maps coordinates, divisions, and death. Their voices travel where machines fail. Through humidity, through smoke, through the jungle's electric hum, their transmissions slice the chaos with perfect clarity. Static fills the airwaves, but the code talkers remain calm. "Send again," they say, and the message repeats. Identical, flawless, unbroken. The entire war begins to pivot around their words. In the command posts of the Pacific, officers grow to trust a sound they do not understand. When the code talkers speak, orders move faster, artillery strikes more precisely, rescues arrive on time. Their cadence becomes as recognizable as the sound of gunfire itself, a steady rhythm that signals control in the midst of confusion. Commanders call it the human radio, a signal that never falters, never reveals itself. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ocean, the Japanese listen. Their radio operators record every transmission, believing that somewhere within these sounds lies a hidden pattern. Hours of intercepted chatter are fed to linguists and cryptographers in Tokyo. The analysts replay them endlessly, slowing the recordings, isolating syllables, searching for structure. But what they hear defies all logic. "It sounds like chanting," one report notes. Another labels it an unknown tribal dialect, unrelated to any known code. The Japanese intelligence officers, trained in mathematics and science, cannot imagine that the Americans would entrust their military secrets to something as fragile and unpredictable as speech. Convinced it must be mechanical, they conclude that the enemy has developed a new form of encryption device. They are half right. It is a machine, but one made of memory, not metal. Each code talker carries within him the living equivalent of a cipher engine. Precise, instantaneous, unbreakable. No gears, no circuits, no weakness, only discipline, training, and heritage. The irony is quiet, but immense. The same United States that once tried to erase native languages now depends on them for victory. What was once silenced now becomes the most secure sound in the Pacific. The Marines who once doubted now guard the code talkers with reverence. Orders are given that if captured, they are to be protected at all costs, their voices worth more than any weapon they carry. Between battles, the Navajo expand the lexicon still further. New machines, new tactics, new dangers, dive bombers, flamethrowers, reconnaissance flights, all given names drawn from the old world. The code remains alive, evolving like the people who created it. At night, when the noise of battle fades, the code talkers sit beside their radios, cleaning their gear, rehearsing their words in whispers. They do not boast, they do not explain. They know that their language, once punished, once laughed at, now shields thousands. And across the Pacific, in the laboratories of Tokyo, the Empire's brightest minds continue to listen, certain that a mechanical genius hides behind those strange flowing sounds. But what they didn't know was that the weapon they feared most was not made by engineers. It was carried in the hearts of men. In Tokyo, a different kind of war unfolds, not in jungles or seas, but in rooms of ink and silence, rooms filled with maps, transcripts, and intercepted voices. Japanese intelligence officers gather around radios that whisper the enemy's messages in strange, untraceable syllables. The Empire listens carefully and hears nothing it can understand. By 1943, the Imperial General Staff is alarmed. For months, they have captured countless American transmissions, yet none have yielded results. Their finest linguists, men trained in Chinese, English, Russian, and Polynesian dialects, study the recordings endlessly. Still, no pattern emerges. The syllables move too fast, the sounds too fluid. Some describe it as tonal, others as rhythmic, like chanting. All agree on one thing: it is not a language they know. To solve the mystery, the government summons its best minds, professors from Tokyo Imperial University, missionaries who once lived in the American West, and scholars who have studied native tribes. Each is given copies of intercepted messages. Each fails. One report concludes, the speech is not Chinese, not Korean, not Malay. Possibly American Indian origin, but which tribe we cannot say. The words unknown tribal dialect begin to appear in official reports, a quiet confession of defeat disguised as analysis. Yet the Japanese cryptographic division refuses to give up. They are a nation that prides itself on intellect, on precision. Their empire is built on the belief that knowledge can master any enemy. Now, that faith is being tested by voices carried across the Pacific airwaves. In the interrogation rooms of Rabaul and Truk, captured American Marines are questioned relentlessly. The Japanese search them for code books, charts, or written guides, anything that might explain the indecipherable transmissions. But there is nothing. The radios are ordinary, the operators unremarkable. No papers, no manuals, no machines. Only memory, only men. Gradually, a realization begins to take shape among Japanese intelligence officers. This is not a cipher in the traditional sense. There is no substitution system, no predictable key. What they are hearing is something alive, a language that predates the war, predates the empire itself. It shifts with tone, breath, and instinct. No mathematician can decode that. This discovery terrifies them. For decades, the Japanese military had believed that human innovation could overcome all obstacles, that technology, intellect, and willpower could dismantle anything foreign. But now they confront a weapon that cannot be reverse engineered. Their machines cannot measure it, Their scholars cannot define it. It is invisible, intangible, and absolute. Reports flow back to Tokyo describing growing frustration among cryptographers. It is beyond science, one officer admits. It is art. But within that admission lies something deeper, a recognition that the empire has reached the edge of its own imagination. Its understanding of the world, shaped by uniformity and logic, cannot grasp the vastness of another culture's complexity. In the Pacific field stations, Japanese radio operators continue to listen. They fill notebooks with phonetic spellings of the strange sounds, hoping that repetition will reveal meaning. But every new recording only deepens the mystery. Some operators even speculate that the Americans are using a device that manipulates human speech, an early voice scrambler. None can conceive that the key is simply human memory and ancestral rhythm. As the war drags on, the code talkers' messages multiply. From Guadalcanal to Bougainville, the airwaves hum with their voices. To the Americans, it is communication. To the Japanese, it is noise. The empire's scientists calculate frequencies, chart patterns, and build theories, all wrong. Each new attempt leads to greater confusion. The more they study, the less they understand. And so, in laboratories and listening posts across the empire, the unspoken truth takes hold. Japan has encountered a wall it cannot climb. Its intellect, its science, its discipline, all powerless before something it never imagined could matter in war: language as identity, culture as encryption. For the first time, the empire's superiority feels uncertain, and in that uncertainty, something begins to crack. Because while Tokyo searched for logic, the Americans had already discovered faith in the human voice, and in a code born not from machines, but from memory. November 1943. The island of Betio, in the Tarawa Atoll, is just 2 miles long, a narrow strip of coral and sand barely large enough to hold an airfield. But to the American war effort, it is everything. If the Marines can take Tarawa, the road to the Central Pacific opens. If they fail, the island will become a graveyard. The battle begins at dawn on November 20th. The ocean recedes unnaturally far, stranding amphibious vehicles on reefs and leaving Marines to wade through chest-deep water under machine gun fire. The air smells of salt and smoke. Within minutes, the beach becomes a field of wreckage, boats burning, bodies floating, the tide turning red. Communication falters. Units are pinned down, cut off, unable to call for artillery or reinforcements. Radios jammed with confusion. And somewhere amid that chaos, the calm, steady voices of the Navajo code talkers begin to speak. They are stationed in dugouts, in landing craft, in foxholes just behind the front line. Shells burst overhead, but the code flows without hesitation. Their hands move across the radios, their words cutting through static like clear wind through dust. One transmission directs naval gunfire onto an entrenched Japanese position. Coordinates given in seconds, adjusted in real time. The result is devastating. Entire strongpoints vanish under the weight of naval bombardment. Officers later write in their reports, "Without them, we would have lost Tarawa." For 48 hours, the Navajo operators maintain continuous contact between the beachhead and the ships offshore. They work without rest, taking turns between sending and receiving, one translating the chaos of battle into the clean precision of code. The Japanese intercept every message, as always. They hear the rhythm, the repetition, the cadence that means nothing to them, a storm of sound beyond their reach. They record everything, analyze endlessly, and still, every meaning slips away. In those 2 days, 800 messages are transmitted. Everyone arrives flawlessly. Not a single error, no delay, no misinterpretation. The code that began as an experiment in a guarded classroom now carries the full weight of war, and it does not break. Marine commanders begin to realize the scale of what they're witnessing. Every victory on Tarawa, every reinforcement landed, every artillery correction, every successful assault depends on a language once considered obsolete. Men who grew up in silence, on land the government once sought to erase, now guide the guns of an empire. The irony is quiet, almost sacred, yet the human cost is unbearable. Tarawa lasts only 76 hours, but in that time, over 1,000 Marines are killed, and nearly all of the Japanese defenders are annihilated. The island is secured at a terrible price, an entire generation of young men swallowed by coral and fire. Amid the ruin, the Navajo remain unshaken. When the battle ends, they send one final message to command: mission complete. In the aftermath, officers file their reports, noting that the Navajo system is faster and more reliable than any method previously used. The recommendation is immediate: expand the program. More recruits are needed. The experiment has become indispensable, but the victory at Tarawa carries something deeper than military efficiency. For the first time, the Marines see that faith, not machinery, not mathematics, has delivered precision. A living code, carried by men whose ancestors once spoke to the wind, has proven stronger than any cipher devised by modern science. Across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence analysts continue their work, unaware that the voice guiding American artillery is the same one their own historians once dismissed as primitive. They will never find its pattern. They will never break its rhythm. The unbroken voice, born in the silence of desert canyons, now echoes across the ocean, from Tarawa's shattered beaches to the halls of command. It has become more than a code. It has become legend. And as the ships pull away from Tarawa's burning shore, the Marines prepare for the next assault, not knowing that this victory is only the beginning of something far greater. By 1944, the Whisper has become an army. What began with 29 volunteers now swells to more than 400 Navajo men serving as code talkers across the Pacific. They are woven through every major Marine division, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, scattered across islands whose names will be written in both glory and grief. Bougainville, Saipan, Guam, Peleliu. Each carries a rifle and a radio. They are trained as Marines first, sharpshooters, scouts, forward observers, and communicators second. Their orders are the same as any soldiers: to fight, to hold, to endure. But their burden is heavier. They carry a secret that even their fellow Marines cannot fully comprehend. The code has grown alongside them, refined, expanded, adapted to each new weapon and tactic of the Pacific War. By the time of the Marianas Campaign, the lexicon exceeds 600 words. Everyone is memorized. Nothing is ever written down. They rehearse it under red lamplight, tracing meaning through memory until the code becomes part of their breathing. B, meaning bomb. Da he ti hi, hummingbird, for fighter plane. Che da gahi, turtle, for tank. Their voices turn the machinery of modern war into living symbols of the natural world. When battle comes, the transformation is instantaneous. Amid machine gun bursts and falling shells, they speak calmly into their microphones. Their syllables ride through static and chaos, carrying coordinates, supply requests, and casualty reports. Other Marines, unable to decipher the sounds, describe it as a kind of music, fast, rhythmic, deliberate. The Japanese intercept every word, but the meaning never reaches them. What they hear is only wind. On Bougainville, Navajo operators coordinate an artillery barrage so precise that it cuts through Japanese positions in the jungle like a surgeon's blade. On Saipan, They relay hundreds of transmissions under bombardment, adjusting fire lines by yards. At Peleliu, they crawl through coral and ash to maintain radio contact when every wire has been cut. The code talker's efficiency shortens battles, saves lives, and turns chaos into coordination. Yet for all their indispensability, they remain anonymous. Their mission is secret, their identity unspoken. They live and fight alongside men who often never learn what they truly do. To most, they are simply the radio guys. But to the few who notice, they are something else, lifelines disguised as men. When communications falter, it is the code talkers' calm voices that restore order. When units become lost, their messages guide them home. Some never return themselves. Dozens of Navajo die in combat, their radios buried in the mud beside them. Others vanish at sea, their names erased by the same waves that carried them across the Pacific. Their families receive telegrams with no explanation, only the standard line, killed in action while serving honorably. The details remain classified, the heroism untold. At night, between battles, they sit together in small circles, speaking softly in their language. The only time it is not bound by secrecy. They share food, stories, silence. Around them, the Pacific wind moves through palm leaves, carrying echoes of home. The mesas, the red dust, the dry rivers. For a moment they are no longer soldiers but sons, remembering the land that gave them the words now saving others. To the American command, their success becomes self-evident. Reports from every division praise the Navajo system as the fastest, most secure communication method in the field. Requests pour in for more operators. The Brotherhood grows, each new recruit taught by veterans of earlier campaigns, each voice adding strength to the chorus of the Unbreakable code. By late 1944, their language spans half the Pacific. Every island taken, every fleet coordinated, every assault launched, all carries traces of their speech. The Empire still listens, still records, still fails to comprehend. What began as an experiment in a classroom now hums across the world's largest ocean, turning human breath into strategy. And yet, even within victory, the weight of silence endures. The code talkers cannot write home about their work. They cannot explain their purpose. Their courage must remain invisible until history itself is ready to speak. But the war is not finished. Ahead lies Iwo Jima, the bloodiest island of them all, where the code will face its final, most brutal test. February 19th, 1945. The island of Iwo Jima rises from the Pacific like a scar. Black sand, sulfur fumes, and the bitter scent of burning earth. For the Marines approaching its shores, it is less an island than a fortress. Beneath the volcanic surface, 21,000 Japanese soldiers wait in tunnels, bunkers, and concealed artillery positions. Every yard of sand will cost blood. The first waves of Marines are torn apart before they reach the beach. Landing craft burn, men sink beneath the ash-heavy surf, and the volcanic soil swallows the wounded. Commanders struggle to maintain order. Radios crackle with incomplete transmissions, lost coordinates, broken calls for fire support. In this chaos, the Navajo code talkers begin to speak. Their radios hum in rhythm with the roar of artillery. Through smoke and confusion, their words cut cleanly across the static. Within minutes, the first clear coordinates for naval gunfire reach offshore ships. Shells rain down on Mount Suribachi with uncanny precision. Observers mark the impact and adjust again. Another correction, another strike. The code moves faster than any system ever tested under fire. In the first 48 hours of the battle, Navajo operators transmit more than 800 messages without a single mistake. Reports move instantly between front lines and command posts, bridging chaos with clarity. The code talkers' calm voices, unbroken even under shell fire, become the unseen backbone of the entire invasion. General Howard Connor, who commands the Marine Communications Center on Iwo Jima, later writes simply, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." It is not an exaggeration. Their speed means the difference between confusion and coordination, between lives lost and lives saved. The Japanese intercept every transmission. Their listening stations record hundreds of hours of Navajo speech. Officers order their best linguists to analyze the sounds. Some soldiers, desperate, attempt to mimic the syllables they hear, trying to trick the Americans into revealing replies. The effort collapses instantly. The rhythm of the language, its tone, inflection, and meaning, cannot be imitated. To those outside it, Navajo is not merely foreign, it is impossible. While the Marines fight their way across the island, the code talkers work without pause. They eat cold rations beside their radios, sleep in bursts measured in minutes. Their uniforms are covered in ash and sweat. Their hands roar from the metal grips of their transmitters. But the transmissions never stop. Even when shell fire shakes their bunkers, the code continues. Smooth, exact, unbreakable. On the fifth day, the American flag rises atop Mount Suribachi, an image destined to become a symbol of victory. Yet below that image, beneath the photograph and the headlines that would follow, the battle still rages. Japanese soldiers refuse to surrender. They emerge from tunnels at night, attacking positions that had already been declared secure. For 36 days, the Marines fight yard by yard through a wasteland of smoke and flame. All the while, the Navajo continue their invisible war. Their messages guide supply convoys through bombardment zones, direct medevac operations, and call in artillery within meters of friendly troops. They operate in shifts, but never stop completely. Even as their comrades fall, their voices remain steady, the pulse of communication in a battle where silence means death. When the island finally falls on March 26, 1945, more than 26,000 American casualties mark the cost of victory. Nearly every Japanese defender is dead. In the after-action reports, one statistic stands out. Throughout the entire operation, not a single Navajo transmission was misinterpreted, delayed, or broken. Not once. The language once banned in American schools, mocked by teachers and punished in classrooms, has saved a nation. Its words, shaped by desert winds, by mountain echoes, by centuries of survival, now echo through the most mechanized war in history. For the code talkers, there is no time for celebration. Another island waits, another battle looms, but for one brief moment, amid the volcanic ruins of Iwo Jima, they have proven the impossible, and as the smoke drifts out to sea, the Empire's listeners remain at their stations, still recording, still analyzing, still deaf to the voice that will never yield its meaning. August 1945. The war that began in fire ends in silence. Japan surrenders. Across the Pacific, the guns fall quiet, and the ocean that had carried death for years becomes still again. The world celebrates. Streets fill with flags and music, crowds gather in the cities, and the headlines shout of victory. But for the Navajo code talkers, there are no parades. Their victory is secret. Their names are not mentioned. Their mission does not exist. They return home quietly, stepping off trains that no one waits beside. There are no reporters, no ceremonies, only dust and the long road back to the reservation. Their uniforms are folded neatly, their radios surrendered, their achievements sealed by military order. The code they carried, the one that guided fleets and saved lives, remains classified. Not even their families are told. When their children ask what they did in the war, they answer simply, "We were Marines, nothing more." The silence they kept on the battlefield continues in peace. Their secrecy, once protection against the enemy, now becomes a wall between them and the country they served. Life at home is not easy. Many return to poverty, to the same conditions they left behind. The promises made by recruiters, education, opportunity, recognition, dissolve into bureaucracy. In schools, the Navajo language is still discouraged. The same syllables that once carried victory are again treated as obstacles to progress. The irony is sharp, but unspoken. Among the code talkers, the bond remains. They gather quietly at community halls and veterans' posts, speaking in fragments about places and faces that others cannot imagine. When one of them mentions Tarawa or Iwo Jima, the others nod. They do not need to explain. Each knows what those words mean, not only the battles, but the burden of knowing what the world does not. The Marine Corps keeps its silence too. The code is considered so valuable that it remains secret through the Korean War, through the rise of new conflicts and technologies. Only a handful of officers remember its origins, and fewer still know the men who created it. The code talkers live their lives in the long shadow of anonymity, carrying medals earned but never worn. In this quiet, a strange kind of perfection endures. The code that could not be broken in war cannot be betrayed in peace. Their silence becomes its final defense. No enemy ever deciphers it. No outsider ever steals it. For 23 years, the greatest secret of the Pacific remains unspoken, guarded not by machines or vaults, but by memory, loyalty, and restraint. And yet, beneath that silence, there is also pride. The code talkers know what they achieved, even if no one else does. They know that their ancestors' language, once banned, once ridiculed, had become the most secure weapon of modern war. They know that in the hardest moments, when steel and fire failed, it was words that held the line. Some of them keep radios in their homes, small reminders of what once was. When the static crackles, they remember those distant voices, the hum of the Pacific, the rhythm of messages moving through darkness. They remember the code that bound them together, and the world that could never hear it. History moves on. New wars, new machines, new languages. But for the Navajo code talkers, the truest legacy remains unseen. The dignity of silence, the faith of men who kept a promise beyond victory. And somewhere in the quiet of the desert, the unbroken code still waits, not on paper, not in archives, but in the hearts of those who never spoke of what they had done. For a quarter of a century, the world moves forward while the voices that once carried it toward victory remain silent. The Navajo Code, the most secure communication system of the Pacific War, stays locked behind military secrecy. Officially, it does not exist. Even as other wartime innovations are declassified and celebrated, this one is withheld, buried beneath the label Top Secret. The men who created and maintained it grow older. They work as ranchers, mechanics, teachers, miners, ordinary lives after extraordinary service. Some carry the weight of memories they cannot share, even with their families. When they gather at veterans' halls, their stories end where classification begins. Questions are answered with smiles or silence. The oath they took during the war still holds. In 1968, 23 years after Japan's surrender, the United States government finally declassifies the Navajo Code. The truth emerges slowly, at first through local news stories, then through national broadcasts. The world learns that an ancient language, once banned in schools, once called primitive, had become the most unbreakable code in modern warfare. Journalists seek out the aging veterans. They find them in small towns across Arizona and New Mexico, their hair now gray, their radios long silent. One by one, the men begin to speak, carefully at first, as if afraid the secret might still be forbidden. They tell of Tarawa, of Palelu, of Iwo Jima, of messages sent through fire and rain without a single error. Their humility disarms the reporters. When asked how they did it, one replies simply, "We just talked." Historians, too, are astonished. Analysis of Japanese intelligence records confirms what had once seemed unbelievable. Despite intercepting thousands of transmissions, Japan never identified the Navajo language correctly. Their reports labeled it only as an unknown tribal dialect. The empire that built its reputation on discipline and intellect had been defeated by imagination, by a voice it could neither name nor comprehend. Recognition follows, but slowly. The Marine Corps issues official commendations. Military historians revise their accounts of the Pacific War, inserting a new chapter, one that had been missing from the narrative of victory. Schools begin teaching the story, and for the first time, the word Navajo appears alongside the battles of Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima. Yet the men themselves remain modest. When honored at reunions, they often deflect the praise. "We did our job," they say, "like everyone else." Still, beneath that quiet dignity lies a subtle reckoning. For decades their language had been punished. Now it was being celebrated. For some, the recognition feels like restoration. For others, like irony. What had once been forbidden in classrooms had saved the very nation that forbade it. The moral weight of that truth lingers in every interview, every ceremony, every photograph of wrinkled hands saluting beneath desert sunlight. In the archives of the Pentagon, the documents once stamped, classified, are finally opened to public view. Inside them, terse reports and field communications reveal what the veterans had always known, that precision and courage can exist without machinery, and that a culture nearly erased had, for a moment in history, become America's shield. After 25 years of silence, the voices that guided victory are heard again. They speak not of revenge, not of pride, but of service, of duty fulfilled and language redeemed. The war has long since ended, but the story of its quietest heroes is only beginning to be told. And as history finally begins to listen, the men who once carried the code can at last speak, not as soldiers of secrecy, but as keepers of a legacy the world had almost forgotten. Time moves on. The men who once spoke through gunfire now speak to classrooms, universities, and documentaries. Their hair is silver, their hands slower, but their words, the same words that once guided fleets and battalions, still flow with the same quiet power. Linguists arrive from around the world to study what military secrecy had preserved, a language built on image, rhythm, and relation, untouched by modern reduction. What they discover is more than grammar or syntax. Navajo is not a language of objects. It is a language of motion, of relationships between things. Its verbs breathe, its nouns carry memory. Every word is tied to earth and season, to sound and story. What science finds in it is what the Marines once found on the battlefield, a complexity beyond imitation. It becomes a symbol of linguistic resilience, an example of how diversity itself can be strength. In classrooms across the American Southwest, something changes. The language once punished in boarding schools now fills textbooks and lesson plans. Children recite the same phrases their grandfathers once whispered into radios, not as code, but as heritage. Teachers who were once forbidden to speak Navajo now teach it with pride. The paradox is almost sacred. A language that survived because of war, and now survives in peace because of what it achieved there. Outside the reservations, the story gains momentum. Historians write volumes, filmmakers document the battles, and museums dedicate entire exhibits to the code talkers. Each retelling reveals the same moral. that technology alone does not define modern warfare. The human mind, disciplined, creative, rooted in culture, can still outthink the machine. In 2001, after decades of advocacy and recognition efforts, the United States government finally honors the surviving Navajo code talkers. They gather in Washington, D.C., wearing medals instead of dog tags. Some walk with canes, others are pushed in wheelchairs, but all stand when the Marine Corps hymn begins. The gold medal glints against aged uniforms, the same color as the desert sun they once left behind. President George W. Bush presents the medals personally, describing their work as an example of how freedom speaks with many voices. For the veterans, the ceremony is both closure and renewal. One of them, Samuel Sandoval, speaks softly into a microphone. Our voices carried victory. Around him, the hall falls silent. It is not applause that fills the air, but reverence. For the Navajo Nation, the honor is more than symbolic. It is proof that their culture, once marginalized, once endangered, had defended the world at its darkest hour. Linguists call it survival through adaptation. The veterans call it duty. Either way, the message endures. That language is not only identity, but defense. Each word, when remembered, becomes a shield against erasure. Today, recordings of the Code Talkers' transmissions are preserved in archives and museums. Their frequency is silent, their mission long complete, but their rhythm lingers in every syllable still spoken on Navajo land. The language that once guided artillery now guides generations toward pride and continuity. And in that continuity lies the truest legacy of all, that words, when guarded, can save worlds. But even as the story finds its ending, history is not yet finished listening. Across the ocean, the former enemy reflects on the voice they could never break. After the war, the victors return home to celebration, but in Japan, the silence that follows defeat is heavier. Cities lie in ruin, and the empire's officers, men once certain of their invincibility, now sift through the wreckage of their own assumptions. Among them are the cryptographers, linguists, and radio operators who once listened so intently to the Americans' secret voices. They had captured thousands of transmissions, charted their patterns, and built entire research teams around decoding them. And yet, after years of effort, they had understood nothing. In the years that follow, during interviews and post-war interrogations, several Japanese officers speak with rare candor about that failure. One former intelligence commander admits, "We had nothing like it." He explains that Japan had trusted in machines, in mathematics, in the scientific precision of language. The Americans, by contrast, had placed their faith in something human, the living memory of men, the rhythm of an unwritten tongue. To the Japanese cryptographic mind, that idea was unthinkable. Their training taught that the future of war belonged to engineering, to the perfection of process. The notion that the enemy's most secure code might come from heritage, from oral tradition, from something ancient and invisible, that possibility lay entirely beyond their framework. They could measure frequency and repetition, but not meaning born from culture. What they had faced was not a cipher to be broken, but a world-view to be understood. In their reports, Japanese analysts described the strange, melodic tone of the intercepted transmissions. One even speculated that the Americans were using a voice-modulating device. In truth, the device was a Navajo Marine sitting in a foxhole, speaking to another half a world away. The paradox is striking. The empire of steel, an industrial giant of planes, ships, and machines, was undone by voices carried on airwaves. Technology bowed before language. Precision yielded to intuition. The modern world had been defeated by something it considered primitive. Yet in that irony lies the deeper lesson: innovation is not always progress. Sometimes survival comes from remembering. As Japan rebuilds, many of its officers begin to reflect on the cultural arrogance that had shaped their strategy. They had believed they understood their enemy because they understood his machines. But they had never understood his diversity. The United States, a nation of many voices, had turned that diversity into strength, into a weapon no empire of uniformity could predict. Historians later note that this was more than a military victory. It was a moral one. The war of codes was also a war of philosophies, between a system that valued conformity and one that allowed contradiction to exist, even to flourish. The Navajo code talkers embodied that contradiction, men from a culture oppressed by the very nation they defended, using a language once silenced to protect the freedom of others. For Japan's defeated officers, the realization is sobering. They had built an empire on mastery, on the belief that the world could be reduced to systems, but on the airwaves above the Pacific, they had encountered something beyond their reach, something that could not be measured, copied, or conquered. Every empire, they would come to understand, eventually falls to what it cannot comprehend. In the years that followed, a few Japanese linguists would study the Navajo language, not as enemies, but as admirers. They found in it a beauty that mirrored its strength, a reminder that complexity and humility can coexist. And in that quiet reflection, the lesson remains that humility, not size, is the final strength, and that the mightiest empires fall not to weapons, but to the limits of their own imagination. When the war ends, the ships come home heavy with silence. The Navajo Marines disembark among crowds that cheer for victory, yet their part in it cannot be spoken. They return to the high deserts of Arizona and New Mexico, where red cliffs meet open sky, carrying within them a history the world does not yet know. Their families wait on the dusty roads outside Window Rock, Shiprock, and Tuba City. Mothers embrace sons who seem both familiar and changed, men whose eyes have seen islands and oceans far beyond the mazes of their youth. They sense pride, but also distance. The code talkers cannot explain where they have been or what they have done. Their mission remains classified, their words still bound by secrecy. They simply say, "We served." In the following years, life resumes its quiet rhythm. Fields are tended, sheep return to pasture. The veterans marry, raise families, build lives on the same land that had once been their only world. Yet behind that peace lies the echo of static, the remembered crackle of radios, and the weight of words that could never be repeated. They live as anonymous patriots, their deeds erased from public memory. When other veterans speak of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, or Iwo Jima, they listen, offering no correction. The silence that once protected them from the enemy now protects the truth from the world. The code endures because they do. Decades pass. The Cold War rises and wanes. New languages dominate the airwaves. But on the reservations, the old voices remain. Men sitting beneath the desert sun, telling stories that stop short of their greatest chapters. Only when the code is finally declassified in 1968 does the truth begin to surface, and when it does, the world listens in disbelief. Ceremonies follow. Marine Corps generals stand beside elders in turquoise necklaces. American flags ripple alongside Navajo blankets. Medals are pinned on jackets that once bore combat insignia. The veterans, now in their later years, accept the honors quietly, with the same humility they carried into war. They had never fought for recognition, only to serve. In museums across the nation, their radios now sit behind glass, their dials frozen mid-transmission. Next to them rest photographs, field maps, and the woven patterns of Navajo blankets, symbols of two worlds that once seemed far apart, now forever joined. Visitors read the displays and realize that a nation's survival once depended on a language almost lost. For the Navajo people, the recognition carries a deeper meaning. The sound of their language, once forbidden in schools and punished in classrooms, becomes a monument in itself, a testament to endurance. Children grow up learning that their ancestors' words defended a world that had not always defended them. The shame once attached to speaking Navajo transforms into pride. The whisper has become a hymn, and when the surviving code talkers gather for reunions, they speak softly in the language that once won a war. Their voices are slower now, their laughter deeper, their memories sharper in silence than in sound. Some bring their grandchildren to listen, to witness how words, not weapons, once carried freedom across an ocean. In the stillness of the desert evening, the echoes return, the hum of the radio, the rhythm of syllables that no enemy could ever understand. Those sounds no longer signal battle. They are remembrance. They are peace. And as the last of the code talkers fade into history, their language remains, not as a secret, but as a song the nation will never again forget. In 1942, Japan's commanders believed they understood the American mind. They had studied its industry, its tactics, its mathematics. They knew the pattern of its codes, the rhythm of its encryption, the logic of its machines. Every signal, they thought, could be reduced to order. Every cipher, given time, could be solved. But they were wrong, because what America would send against them was not a machine, nor a formula, but something older than the nation itself. The Navajo code was not invented, it was remembered. Born of sand, wind, and story, it came from a landscape that spoke its own language, a language shaped not by conquest, but by survival. When Philip Johnston brought the idea to the Marines, few understood that what he offered was not merely communication, but philosophy. Where other codes depended on numbers, this one depended on memory. Where others relied on repetition, this one thrived on rhythm. At its heart lay something no algorithm could capture: reverence. The Navajo language did not separate the world into fragments. It wove it together. Its words carried not only meaning, but relationship between the earth, the sky, and the human voice. When those voices entered the static of the Pacific War, they carried more than orders. They carried continuity, the link between an ancient people and a modern world that had nearly forgotten them. For the Japanese, this was inconceivable. Their intelligence course searched endlessly for structure, for logic. But what they were hearing was not logic, it was life. It shifted, adapted, and breathed. It moved with tone and context, guided by a memory far older than the empire they served. To them, it sounded like music, and in a way, it was. Each syllable precise, each pause deliberate, each message carried through chaos as steady as a heartbeat. By 1945, that rhythm had become the hidden pulse of victory. It guided artillery at Iwo Jima, directed reinforcements at Tarawa, and called in air support at Saipan. In 800 flawless transmissions, not a single code was broken, not a single message lost. When the last battles ended and Japan's radios fell silent, the code talkers' voices still echoed across the Pacific, not as noise, but as a testament. No machine could imitate what they had done. No computer could replicate the intuition of memory, the cadence of belonging. The Navajo spoke not from manuals, but from the inherited precision of culture, from stories told by firelight, from landscapes carried in sound. Their language had been treated as a relic. The war revealed it as a revolution. For Japan's cryptographers, it was the one puzzle that defied their empire's faith in intellect. For America, it was the moment when its most marginalized people became its most indispensable. The irony was profound. The same language once banned in schools had now defended the very nation that had silenced it. History rarely writes symmetry so perfectly. When the war ended, the Navajo code talkers returned to quiet places. The radios were packed away, the code remained classified. The Empire's radios, once alive with intercepted chatter, went dead. But the echoes of that unbroken voice continued, reverberating through history, through the memory of those who finally learned what had been hidden all along. Decades later, when the story became public, the world reacted with astonishment. How could such simplicity defeat such power? But it was not simplicity, it was wisdom, a reminder that human memory, when rooted in culture, can outlast any empire built on steel. The story of the Navajo code talkers is not only a tale of military genius, it is a lesson in humility, that progress does not always come from invention, but from understanding what already exists. In the vast machinery of war, victory had come not from decoding the future, but from preserving the past. The Pacific War ended in 1945. The Empire's radios were silent, but the words, those ancient syllables born from earth and wind, still carried. They carried the weight of history, the endurance of identity, and the proof that no weapon is stronger than the soul that wields it. They never expected it. They never broke it.